Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about evolution, but specifically some common misconceptions when it comes to evolution and natural selection. First up, we have that evolution is just a theory. So this is actually completely true from a scientific perspective. See, in everyday language, we use the word theory in a kind of casual way. Like I might say, I have a theory why my toaster's broken. However, in a scientific context, the word theory means something completely different. A scientific theory, by definition, is a well-substantiated, comprehensive explanation of a natural phenomenon. It's built on a really large body of evidence from repeated observation and research. So by definition, a theory is something that has tons of research and data to back it up. If that didn't get you, then think of gravity. Gravity is also technically just a theory, but it's something that is well substantiated with lots of research and data. There's also no optimal life form or strategy. So often there's this misconception that evolution is moving us towards something optimal or perfect, right? Or that there's certain characteristics that we can just inherently call good or bad. But any characteristic of a living thing, you can't truly label it as good or bad because it always has to do with context. Here's a perfect example. Sickle cell anemia is a disease that affects a lot of people. It has really awful symptoms. It occurs when the red blood cells are misformed. So what happens is red blood cells contain hemoglobin, a protein, and that protein is vital to carrying oxygen we breathe throughout the body. In sickle cell, that hemoglobin is a different shape, and actually so the red blood cells themselves have this sickle shape, and red blood cells have a lower capacity for moving oxygen throughout the body, and so there's some pretty negative side effects that come with that. So we'd be really quick to label this as a bad thing, right? Because it negatively impacts people. However, it turns out that sickle cell anemia actually evolved in Africa in an area where malaria was really high. So malaria is a disease that's caused by a eukaryotic microbe. It's passed via mosquito, and it kills tons of people annually. So it's a really deadly disease. People with sickle cell are actually much less likely to die from malaria or even contract it in the first place. So not saying that sickle cell is good or that it's bad, but you can see how context is really important here. There's also this misconception that evolution moves towards complexity. So we talked about how there's not really any optimum, and it's not necessarily the case that we're also moving towards something more complex either. So here's a great example. The Mexican blind cavefish actually evolved from a fish that had normal fish eyes that could perceive light wavelengths. These fish were, over time living in a dark cave environment, and the need for eyesight was no longer there. So instead of evolution moving in a direction where these fish developed some sort of really complicated eye structure that could help them with perception in total darkness, that's too complicated. Instead, what we saw happen was the more simple solution. They just lost their eyes altogether. So evolution is not necessarily moving towards complexity, it's moving towards something that just works, right, and saves energy. So on that note, we're not moving towards perfection, we're just moving towards what works. Again, because there are always trade-offs, right? If something is really energetically expensive, well, then we're using up energy that could be used somewhere else. So energy budgets kind of help explain why this happens. So another really, kind of funny example is rabbits. If you've ever owned a rabbit, you might have seen them eating their own poop, and that's actually completely normal. It's called coprophagy. So they eat their own poop because their digestive system can't extract all nutrients from plant material in one pass. So the way I'm going to explain this is not necessarily correct, but think of it as like they have two stomachs. The first stomach is really good at absorbing nutrients, and the second stomach is really good at breaking down plant fiber. So the first time that they eat all that plant fiber, they can't really absorb the nutrients from it because it's still in the fibrous form. And then when it moves to the second stomach, they can break down the plant fiber, and now these nutrients are available, but they already skipped the stomach that could absorb those nutrients. So what they do is they poop, they eat their poop, and then they can get the nutrients. So this is just a silly, real example of how we're not moving towards some sort of perfection. It's just solutions in a way, given a certain selective pressure from the environment. Okay, Another misconception has to do with this photo. It shows humans evolving from monkeys. So did we evolve from monkeys? You can probably tell from my tone, no. That's not how we would describe it. In evolutionary terms, monkeys or apes, they are more like our siblings. They are not something that we descended from. So these phylogenetic trees show this branching, and you can think of the base of the tree as the last common ancestor. So everything alive on Earth right now, Luca, last common ancestor. Everything alive on Earth right now has been evolving for the same amount of time. A bacterium that's, on my skin, or a monkey that's found somewhere in the tropics, and then me. We've all been evolving, or like our species have been evolving, I should say, for the same amount of time. It's a weird concept, right? But we're all coming from some common ancestor. So let's see, the common ancestor of chimpanzees and monkeys, you can think of it as like maybe that common ancestor wasn't necessarily a chimpanzee or a human. Yeah, it was like some sort of in between, right? Or like something different altogether. Maybe it was a little more chimpanzee than human, but you get what I'm saying. And then these two different species evolved from that common ancestor. So all of the different ape or monkey-like animals that are alive on Earth today, we can be thought of more as like siblings rather than one coming from the other, although we do share common ancestors. Another misconception is about who evolves. So individuals do not evolve, but populations do. So what I mean is a classic example of evolution is the giraffe's neck getting longer and longer. In one giraffe lifetime, there's no giraffe where they just grow their neck over their lifetime and then somehow pass that on to their offspring. Instead, there might be a giraffe with a particularly long neck, or like a community of giraffes with particularly long necks, and that gives them some sort of survival advantage. And then they pass on those traits, and over time, we see in the population a shift in the characteristics or the gene pool, really. And so over time, the population evolves and we see longer and longer necks. But it's not like one individual is doing that within their lifetime. They're just part of this longer process. There's also this misconception that organisms evolve on purpose. So if we go back to like our giraffe example, giraffes aren't thinking, it'd be good to have a longer neck. I'm going to evolve a longer neck and that's going to help me. Like there's no conscious thought that we know of that's involved in this. It has to do with the selective pressure from the environment that's pushing in a way for certain traits. So there's no evolution on purpose. There's just variety in a population. And then there's some sort of selective pressure that will, how do I say it differently? I'm going to put pressure and select for a certain trait over another. So maybe one year there is a massive drought. Well, any plants that just randomly happen to have characteristics that help them survive drought, they're the ones that are going to survive. They didn't do it on purpose, right? There's just natural variation in the population, but they're the ones that have that advantage. And it's only advantageous if there's a drought. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the big common misconceptions when it comes to evolution and natural selection.